Twitter was, Code Pink is it's an anti-war group that was formed in 2002, primarily made up of women. And it was, so they, this week you had the launch of the Bush Library, and Bush was heavily promoting his cause. So Code Pink, promoted with about, I think, 10,000 Thunderclap members, and they promoted the hashtag Arrest Bush. The hashtag is very clear, and the message and the goal of it is clear. They have an awesome photo here where they have different prisoners, like fake mock-ups of Bush and Condoleezza Rice in prison outfits. And so that's a cool example of Thunderclap. I think it's limited in how it's used, but it's a very good tool, and it's very basic and easy to understand. It's cool.
Can be a good useful strategy.
So, for weeks in advance, we had very well-intentioned, coordinated campaign on the messaging. So that really is important. Not so much what hashtag you use, but they just use a singular hashtag, perhaps. The less hashtags you have, the better. The less confusion, the less divided crowds, the less ambiguity.
Short, simple, having
your way, as McDonald's would put it. We used mobile notifications, like you were mentioning about using a cell phone. Smart and dumb phones, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. You would, so I'm not constantly following exactly what everyone else is tweeting from the same account, but by using mobile notifications, I would get a text update of everything that was tweeted out from that account. And this way I could either see if they just tweeted out a picture, or maybe there was an eviction going on, 2 blocks over, and I should come over and get some support. Maybe we need more cameras over. Or, we have a medic team, and, maybe we need to reroute the medics. Or if I'm lost, and I can help redirect people that way. We'll discuss more on that. This is, I'm really bad at graphics. That's #1 confession. This was for Hurricane Sandy relief efforts. So I'll try to give a narration of what happened. October 29th was when the hurricane hit New York City, New Jersey, parts of Connecticut, and other areas. And in this case scenario, this is a typical example where you're well prepared, you have trained activists, you have the resources, but you're not sure what's going to happen or what to expect. This is a scenario that most mainstream media comes from. Only mainstream media is not trying to change any systematic issues. They're not political, they're strictly reporting. And so in addition to a duty of reporting, we're also trying to, assess the situation here from a political context. And that's a context that many activists are coming in from. Over here we had the Occupy Wallerstein NYC Twitter account. That is the largest account we had access to, directly 140,000 followers. We were looking at, this will symbolize as, first there was all the Twitter streams of what's happened with Hurricane Sandy. There was no agreement as to what hashtags to use. We were just tweeting out, calls for help or calls for volunteering, pictures of the houses that were destroyed with hashtags Hurricane Sandy, or just chaos or storm. And those I think were the most obvious, but we had to do a lot of data mining of about 400 different hashtags that we thought were potential. We also did a lot of location-based hashtags, like what's happening in Hoboken, New Jersey, or in the Lower East Side, or when certain power plants and hospitals went out. So those were things that we were looking at. So we're doing that, and then with our large account and large access, we're redirecting people to the new account we made, Occupy Sandy. Occupy Sandy got 11,000 followers in 2 days. And then over the past 4 months, we got another 5,000 followers. It's not as fast. But the point is, people were readily eager for assistance, and Red Cross and FEMA were nowhere to be found in many of these critical areas that we needed help in. So the public is now redirecting a lot of its tweets to Occupy Wallerstein NYC and Occupy Sandy. Now it doesn't matter which accounts they're redirecting them to, because someone like me has access to both of them, and how we respond, that we choose. Remember what I said earlier about the streams, and with the streams, if you go on Occupy Sandy Twitter account itself, I can see every single tweet that was put out there. But if I have 50,000 tweets, and most of them are very individualized messages, it's going to make it very difficult to read or get a backlog of what's happening. So for the most part, we would respond back on, I would call them a local or junk account, a verified account that we're not trying to use for outreach or growth or for PR purposes. And so this would be have very few followers. We're not trying to build a follower. We're just trying to give an answer. Something like a link of here's the location you can volunteer at, or here are the hours that the kitchen is open, and clothes for, or like, you know, we need toilet paper and baby powder products, and we don't need any more batteries. The purpose of Occupy Sandy was to have public relations to keep mainstream media in check. You know, if they're reporting things, sometimes a lot of positive coverage in this case, but also like if they're misreporting things, like the New York Post article that was talking about the NYPD, New York Police Department, and Occupy Sandy relation, which had a lot of errors in it. We're trying to get drives. We're also bringing it to different committees, like a medical community. There were a lot of people who didn't have emergencies that fit the requirements for a 911 call, you know, for emergency services, but perhaps they were bedbound and they needed food, or, you know, someone in Connecticut was really worried they had no telephone access to their loved ones. So they would like message us privately the address of these stuff, and we would go and organize mass check-ins on individual people. So this was like a really high-level sophistication of different services that the government should have been doing, and instead we're doing it with, you know, nothing more than basic tools, social media, a website, occupysandy.com. It's worth checking out in terms of its interface. And this is just so we had the different structures. Go on to the next slide.
Well, I'm gonna add a little bit. Okay, I think that one of the things that I find the most important from this is that if there is movement of people, you're going to really amplify your accounts. Like Occupy Sandy got this many followers not because Twitter is this like wonderful thing, or social media in general is this wonderful thing, even like Facebook, anything. That, you know, we're not looking for the next big thing. The thing that was really built was a movement, and that these are real things. And if you do that, you're gonna have people following your account. You're gonna have people watching your radical media. Because this is the ways that people are staying involved and getting informed. So I think it's just really important to ground your media strategy in your organizing and use it to amplify your message, because you can certainly reach more allies, but also really using it to make sure that your movement is growing.
I have a question about keeping the media in check. Like, give me an example of keeping the media in check.
Examples of keeping media in
Yeah,
check?
only one or two. If you can think.
Sure. So for example, I think there's part of a larger systematic check of media. You know, whether it's calling out Fox News when they say something outrageous or libelous. And like, you know, the New York Post, it's almost de facto official that they have the worst journalistic integrity. The only reason people still buy them is because of the sports coverage. No sports, no one would buy from them. And like CNN is a really good example of mainstream TV that has its coverage dropping in the millions. And I don't think it's because the viewers are changing their political views. I think they're fed up of CNN. And they're instead referring to Democracy Now!, Al Jazeera, and social media on Twitter. I, for myself, you know, I would never, you know, watch mainstream media for the purpose of getting news. I might watch them only to keep them accountable, but I don't find them reliable at all.
Well, I'm just saying I don't find them actually getting to be more accountable.
Well, okay, like, I mean, I think that's the job of us as activists, is to provide intervention to these systems. So like a great example of intervention from social media was like your Anon News hearing about the Steubenville rape and like creating this hashtag, Occupy Steubenville, and then 10,000 people show up on the streets. And like, obviously there were definitely organizers in Steubenville going, knocking door to door, telling about these stories. But because people cared, they showed up and got politically involved. And also, Anon, but then the next day, the mainstream media is talking about it. Same thing with the Boston bombing. You know, the Boston bombing, the first guy to tweet it out, like, you know, became the Twitter that started that. And he only had 200 people. And people on social media were correcting the mainstream media. They're like, this is not true, you are wrong, like, what's up, Bill?
Yeah, I mean, I remember that night, I was up, and I realized maybe I should look on the Boston police scanner. And that was, I mean, they're thinking about shutting down the police scanner now because of, they were leaking details over Twitter. But the thing is, as far as I'm concerned, April 19th, 2013 was the day that mainstream media started to die. It went into like the winter of its life because, I mean, think about it, YAN started tweeting about that exactly when it happened, and CNN didn't even start until 30 minutes after.
And that's what I did my research on, which maybe I'll show you more the theoretical if people are interested in that, is, but yeah, MSNBC during the Olympics coverage was bombasted for not live streaming. everyone was like, why aren't you live streaming? Why are you just providing coverage 5 minutes later? This is ridiculous because, you know, the Occupy activists have been live streaming for like a year and 3 million people have watched it. So that's how we are keeping these structures accountable. And yeah, a lot of the mainstream media has lost so many people in the last year, and these people are going somewhere.
I would be careful not to overgeneralize them because mainstream media has access to hundreds of millions of dollars and political connections, and so I think they're very ineffective at what they do, but they still have a significant amount of power. But you know, here we're seeing a lot of examples of for virtually zero budget people, regular people, are making a bigger eruption in the media. That's exciting, but you know, they're also learning on the job, and so we're constantly trying to outperform each other.
We're both providing intervention to each other.
And so the other thing that we were providing, you know, in the sense that Occupy Sandy was political, was many people were asking, like, how is Occupy Sandy different from Occupy Wall Street? For me, I think both of them were built around disaster relief, and you know, we're showing the ineptitude of the existing infrastructures. You know, we're doing the jobs of FEMA, Red Cross, the National Guard, and they had such a, I think it's because, you know, they were coming from a bureaucratic perspective where they have to officiate everything and, you know, sign off certain things. You have soldiers from Arkansas who don't know any of the cultural dynamics of the community, something that local regional activists understand very well. And it was one of those really, just recently, I mean, the White House celebrated a bunch of partners in Hurricane Sandy relief effort. I don't think it's any coincidence that they omitted Occupy Sandy because of what Occupy Sandy represents today, which is a challenge to the legitimacy and aptitude.
One thing, oh, I'm sorry.
Go for it.
Actually, one thing that was really cool was when I remember the NBC Nightly News did a thing on Occupy Sandy. It was real short. It was like their people helping people kind of thing. I was really amazed that they would even put like 5 minutes of coverage on it, because it's like some that it's not them.
Not everyone inside CNN and MSNBC are bad, and I think there are a lot of sincere people who recognize them. And like, here's the thing, like, they didn't give any meaningful articulation about Occupy Sandy, but once they get that exposure out there, just the phrase Occupy Sandy, and then you start searching the term yourself, go on our website, come to any of our 30 different hubs that we had, you would see what it was for yourself. And you know, the same thing happened with Occupy and the mainstream media. The mainstream media lambasted Occupy, but many people weren't sure. They just wanted to check it out, confirm it for themselves. And so that's a really good way of subverting it. I'll just bring up the unrelated, I mean, the example of WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks has 1.1 million followers, and I mean, they're really bold in that they're, you know, setting themselves against every single government around the world and every single corporation. And, you know, they only abide by the laws of physics, not the laws of any international organizations. But what they did was, with the collateral murder video, is everyone familiar with that?
Yeah.
It was a video where soldiers, American soldiers, are shooting down these Reuters journalists, and afterwards, again, collateral damage when people try to, you know, help those people that were injured, Secret Service survivors. And so CNN posted about a 30-second clip of it, just 30 seconds. Fox News was going to get really smart at them and featured a whole 5-minute video. Reality, I think, both lost, but like, WikiLeaks made the mainstream media itself pit themselves against each other. And that's why what we're seeing, like earlier with CNN and New York Post, they're trying to compete against all the other mainstream media, compete against your non-news, and in the result, they're making journalistic errors, and they're completely tripping over themselves. And so it's really fun to put them mechanisms of free market in place where the way it should work, you know, where competition creates innovation.
Well, that was actually Marx's whole theory, was that the ways that regular people could subvert capitalism is by pitting these capitalist interests against each other. Because, you know, like, Fox wants to make money, but so does CNN. And so, like, most of the time they're fighting us, because, like, they really don't want us to make money. But, you know, sometimes they're going to fight each other, and then we get kind of free reign.
So it's the good and the bad about Occupy Sandy. There were 30 associated accounts, either like sub-accounts that random people made, and you know, we're doing really important work, but they didn't understand perhaps the strategy, as well as just many different locations. And trying to organize that on Twitter is really difficult. It's almost a paradox. I'm giving you a Twitter presentation without tweeting it. They used Google Docs and Pirate Pads. If you Google Pirate Pads, it's really awesome. It's a live pad that it doesn't track your IP address or anything, and you can collaborate. It types it in different letters and such, so you can see who did what. And this is actually recording the entire typing process. So if people are like editing or trying to delete you and such, you could just see like where all those edits happen and such. So it's a very difficult to. Google Docs is also good. I mean, just be aware, that Google regularly gives over the information that you have to any government or corporate institution that requests, and they don't have to tell you about this. But for our purposes, we were fine with that because there was nothing secret about this, and we had all our Gmail access open to the organizers in the rooms.
Yeah.
So every day, like I would go through the different hashtags, do the arduous work, checking which ones were prominent, which ones were still getting any flame, delete them. Sometimes what I would do is instead of explicitly deleting, I would just move the redundant hashtags to a list of we call them leftover hashtags, and we could put them back if necessary. But I try to keep it as organized as possible, and we would train these different activists because, as Emily was saying, media and organizers should not be separate. Our media should be political and organized from the start, and so we should be training organizers themselves. A lot of them like to say, I don't have time, I only have a smartphone and I'm just checking my Facebook. Well, that is precisely social media, and they should be using it in an effective way to make a difference. And so we're always about distributing power, educating people, like what I'm doing here, Skillshare.
You said something about Google Docs versus pirate pads. Google has some, readily will give the information to any government agency one. Well, isn't it true that all electronic media is permanently stored by the government anyway?
No.
Well, there's Thomas Drake from the National Security Agency. He ended up getting the Espionage Act, which is the highest form of treason. He got out of it. Yeah. So all unencrypted emails, primarily Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo, that is all copied. But here's the thing that's different about that. That's on a collective level, where they have petabytes, that's thousands of terabytes.
Mm-hmm.
And they can't immediately process meaningful information out of that beyond what are people talking about. Mm-hmm. To specifically surveil someone specifically, a police department or a federal agency can request from Google to get that information, and Google has revealed through Freedom of Information Act, Google has complied. Mm-hmm. Twitter, on the other hand, has done a good job of fighting back every legal option it can to fight every subpoena, and it tells its users that you're being subpoenaed, so just be aware.
Oh, okay.
But I recommend from the start to have good security culture. If you don't want it online, don't post it online.
Right.
Yeah.
And especially not at the stage where you're not as secure. I don't consider myself experienced in cryptology.
There's also pretty basic, you can use one secret, you can type in one secret and then it'll create this link. So if you want to message someone and you want it encrypted, you can write it and then you can put it on Facebook, you can put it on Twitter, you can put it anywhere, but it only gets to be clicked once. And so they'll click it, they'll read your message, and then the next time it's just the screen is fuzzy.
Sorry, what's it called again?
One secret, I'm gonna put all these awesome,
OneTimeSecrets.com.
I'm gonna put all these awesome links at the end of this and we'll send it out to you. And there is encrypted emails. Who writes those encrypted emails?
RiseUp.
RiseUp.net.
Yep.
And that's a libertarian communist service.
Yeah.
And they also host Pirate Pad, for example.
There's also a Hushmail, which is a great email.
Were you saying something?
Yeah, another thing, enough people don't know about it, but there's a thing called Tor. It's called the it's called the Onion Router, and it's, if you don't have it, if you don't use it, you're you're wide open. There's HTTPS, which is secure, but Tor changes your IP address, and that's the major thing. If you can hide that, you're pretty secure. There's not a lot that you can do.
I see we only have 5 minutes left.
Oh boy.
If possible,
And
can
I
we
do have to get to another
I'm
clinic
gonna show
actually.
that.
I'm gonna let you keep talking because I need to treat. Is it almost 4? Is that what time it is?
It's almost 3.
5:03.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I was 3 p.m.
Relax.
Woo!
So the final event is, does everyone know about Brooklyn protests? And less people will know about that.
No.
You would.
Yeah,
Al Jazeera Brooklyn protest.
yeah.
So Brooklyn protest, March 11th, 2013, about 2
I'll get
months
a
ago.
YouTube of that. Is that legit?
Hmm?
I'll get a YouTube for you.
So Brooklyn protest was